A UFO whistleblower has a fascinating story to tell. Back in 2005, Keith, he says, told me was the date on which he received a story just about as shocking and controversial as the ones I had uncovered between 2001 and 2003. According to the writer, months after my Roswell-themed book Body Snatchers in the Desert was published in June 2005, I received an out-of-blue email from a well-respected Australian UFO researcher. We do have a lot of Australian UFO sightings as well, and also besides that, hotspots that are in Mexico and Puerto Rico. He says, as Keith notes himself, the well-respected UFO researcher was Keith Basterfield, and as Keith notes himself, he says, I have been interested in the subject of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, since the 1960s. Over the years, I have held a variety of roles in numerous Australian state, national, and international organizations studying the phenomena. My book has appeared in various state, national, and international newsletters, magazines, and journals. Between 2003 and 2008, I was involved in a search for Australian government documents relating to UAP with the Adelaide-based Aura network. Keith had a fascinating account to relate that dovetailed very closely to the data given to me by AI Al Barker, Bill Salter, the Black Widow, and the Cardinal, 4 people who I interviewed for my 2005 book, Body Snatchers in the Desert. Notably, the information was provided by Keith well before Body Snatchers in the Desert was published, and when the existence of the book and the story it told was still firmly under wraps in the offices of Simon & Schuster in New York, the publishing company. And it was specifically after my book was published that Keith realized the data given to him sometime earlier was eerily similar to that which I had uncovered. He wasted no time in getting in touch with me, and I listened carefully to what Keith had to say. Tuesday, January 11, 2005. Keith told me that was the date on which he received a story just about as shocking and controversial as the ones I had uncovered between 2001 and 2003. On the day in question, Keith was interviewed on Australia's ABC 891 AM radio station. The subject was the work of the Adelaide-based Australian UFO Research Association, specifically in relation to the issue of so-called UFO disclosure. Although Keith did not know this at the time, while he was taking part in the show, a caller phoned in, left his name and number, and asked for Keith to get in touch with him. He did precisely that. It was later in the day that Keith made the call, in which his source somewhat hesitantly revealed snippets of a dark and dirty secret concerning certain things that went down, as in quite literally down, in the New Mexico desert in the summer of 1947. We're talking about the Roswell UFO crash. And such was the potential dangerous nature of the information, Keith felt it was much wiser for the pair to meet up in person rather than discuss matters over the phone. Keith was wise to follow his instincts, and after all, one never knows who might be listening in. And when Keith related the account to me, he preferred not to use the informant's name and gave him an alias instead, Martin. Echoing this, Martin said to me that if I ever told his story, his name should never be revealed. It should be noted, however, that both Keith and I know Martin's real name. As Keith told me, he met Martin at the latter's home in Adelaide, January 15, 2005, roughly 6 months before Body Snatchers in the Desert hit the bookshelves. The story went as follows. Martin's father, a Brit, had worked for a certain army arm of British intelligence decades before Keith got the story. I would later learn that the agency was specifically MI5, which is the UK's equivalent to the United States FBI. Martin's father was sitting upon a secret of epic and grim proportions, one which he had been silently kept under wraps for years. Such were Martin's concerns and worries about sharing the story with Keith. He insisted that the information not be revealed to anyone at all, and without his or Martin's specific permission, or until after Martin's death, whichever came first. Keith agreed to the terms and sat back and listened as a dark and shocking tale came tumbling out. and he revealed at the time Martin chose to share the secrets of his father. Martin's health was far from good. He was seriously ill with a heart condition. It was possible that Martin was not long for this world, although he was not quite on his deathbed yet. The upshot was that Martin wanted to reveal to someone the story that his father had told him while there was still time. Keith listened and also agreed not to place Martin's real full name into the public domain. According to Martin, he was told by his father the truth of Roswell way back in 1959, when Martin was only 12 years old. Such were his father's concerns about imparting what he knew. He asked young Martin never to reveal the story until he was either very old or on his deathbed. And given his serious heart problems that were in evidence in 2005, Martin thought it was close to possibly now or never, hence his decision to share what he knew with Keith. Martin's father had gotten all the information on Roswell from a source working in the U.S. intelligence community. Who exactly, we don't know. Martin's father explained that the events which occurred out in the wilds of the Foster Ranch, Lincoln County, New Mexico, in July 1947 were born out of early and highly secret experiments that had a bearing on the formative years of what would ultimately become the U.S. space program. Keith, in July 2011 online article, revealed what else Martin chose to share with him. The Americans were working on getting into space. Their biggest concern was getting back to Earth and landing without killing the people inside the space vehicle. And landing in water was not considered, but a ground landing was the order of the day. The Americans were experimenting with craft they dropped from aircraft flying in the stratosphere. Also, gigantic balloons were being flown in the stratosphere to drop craft fitted with retro rockets and a drag chute. And the retro rocket was fitted with an altimeter to fire them close to the ground. Lots of UFO sightings were of these craft. The U.S. released bogus flying saucer sightings and later discredited them. And Martin recalled to both Keith and I how his father informed him of a series of high-altitude experiments in the United States in 1947 involving monkeys and pigs, specifically in connection with the prototype craft balloon flights. On this particular occasion, however, the one that spawned the ever-enduring legend of Roswell's crashed UFO, it was decided that a human crew was finally needed. Keith was told that prisoners would volunteer for dangerous missions in return for early release, but were not used in these experiments. The issue of prisoners used in experiments, specifically in relation to radical aircraft-based technology, is not a matter of doubt or tale born out of folklore or conspiracy theorizing. In 1948, staff of Nuclear Energy Propulsion of Aircraft, NEPA, program practically salivated the idea of using prisoners in its aircraft-related trials. Official new declassified records on this issue state the committee is not in a position to make recommendations as to where these tests can be conducted, other than that they should be carried out at some federal, state, or armed services prison where life prisoners are incarcerated and where arrangements can be made with the prison authorities to cooperate on the experiment. The selection of a prison, a matter of top military consideration. Continued cooperation of the prison staff and prisoners for a matter of many years will be required. So that somewhat mirrored the words of my own informants in my 2005 book, namely that prisoners were secretly offered reduced sentences if they were willing to engage in a dicey potential missions for the military. On this occasion, however, it was not prisoners who were on board the ultimately ill-fated craft, but physically and mentally handicapped people. As Keith recalled, 2 to 3 live people were needed. The government got people with hydrocephalus, water in the brain, from a facility. From the interview with Martin, both Keith and I recalled much more too on the matter of the human guinea pigs, and Keith said that the people roped in had big heads, tiny bodies, jaundiced color. One even had no eyes. They put these people in the craft. Either the balloon ruptured early or blew off course and came down. Retro rockets went off and set a fire to it. It landed and a farmer rancher saw it and reported it. And that farmer rancher, of course, was Mac Brazel, the man who let the Roswell cat out of the bag, and thus was born the legend of the Roswell UFO crash of 1947. And this is by Nick Redfern, writer, lecturer, journalist, and it's on by Nick Redfern, guest writer on Collective Spark. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.